A digraph or digram is a pair of characters used to write one phoneme or a sequence of phonemes that does not correspond to the normal values of the two characters combined. The sound is often, but not necessarily, one which cannot be expressed using a single character in the orthography used by the language. Usually, the term digraph is reserved for graphemes whose pronunciation is always or nearly always the same. When digraphs do not represent a distinct phoneme, they may be relics from an earlier period of the language when they did have a different pronunciation, or represent a distinction which is made only in certain dialects, like WH in English. They may also be used for purely etymological reasons, like RH in English. In some language orthographies, like that of Serbian Latin or Croatian, Hungarian, Czech or Slovak, digraphs are considered individual letters, meaning that they have their own place in the alphabet, in the standard orthography, and cannot be separated into their constituent graphemes. For example, when sorting, abbreviating or hyphenating. In others, like English, this is not the case. In Dutch, when the digraph sh is capitalized, both letters are capitalized. Some schemes of romanization make extensive use of digraphs, while others rely solely on diacritics. To avoid ambiguity, transliteration based on diacritics is generally preferred in academic circles. Orthographic transcription systems follow rules of their target language, so they cannot use digraphs if the target language has none. Types. Various patterns are discernible in the form of digraphs. In English, consonant digraphs tend largely to consist of some letter plus a copyright, or to be double letters. Doubling is a common digraph strategy in many orthographies. Some scholars also describe a split digraph, which has a consonant in between two vowels. Heterogeneous digraphs heterogeneous consonant digraphs in English include, ISK copyright normally represents or before IO copyright or IA copyright, ING copyright represents, ICH copyright usually corresponds to when used as an etymological digraph in words of Greek origin, less commonly to in words of French origin, ICKAY copyright corresponds to, IA copyright represents at the beginning of words, represents or is silent at the end of words, IFA copyright represents, IRA copyright represents English in words of Greek origin, ISHA copyright represents, ISHURI copyright usually represents. Word medially before a vowel. IFA copyright usually corresponds to or. See also pronunciation of English. IFA copyright, IA copyright represents in some conservative dialects. In other dialects. And in a few words where it is followed by IO copyright, such as who and whole. See also phonological history of IA copyright. IPSA copyright represents in words transliterated from Slavic languages, and in American dictionary pronunciation spelling. ICA copyright usually appears as before vowels, like in facial and artificial. Otherwise it is as in fancier and icier or as in acid and rancid, IRA copyright represents. Originally, it stood for a labialized sound, while IRA copyright without IWA copyright was non-labialized, but this distinction was lost in most dialects, the two sounds merging into a single alveolar approximant, allophonically labialized at the start of syllables, as in read, E to the first eed. See also rhotic consonant, IQ copyright usually represents. IQAY copyright is conventionally followed by IWA copyright and a vowel letter, with some exceptions. Digraphs may also be composed of vowels. Some letters I, E, O copyright are preferred for the first position, others for the second way copyright. The latter have allographs IY, way copyright in English orthography. Homogeneous digraphs in some languages doubled letters indicate consonant length or vowel length, a stressed syllable or a specific sound, but in other cases they are just part of the spelling convention. The most common double letter in English is ILA copyright, though it does not represent a different sound from ILA copyright, being essentially an etymological digraph. In Welsh, however, ILA copyright stands for a voiceless lateral, and in Spanish and Catalan it stands for a palatal consonant. Vocalic examples from English are IA copyright and IUE copyright. In several languages of Western Europe, including English, French and Catalan, I say copyright is used between vowels for the voiceless sibilant, since an I say copyright alone between vowels is normally voiced. In Romance languages such as Spanish or Catalan, R is used between vowels for the alveolar trill, since an R alone between vowels represents an alveolar flap. In Spanish the digraph NN, which used to indicate, was turned into the letter A plus or minus, while LL indicates. In Portuguese, the digraph NH indicates, and LH indicates. In several Germanic languages, including English, CC corresponds to C and signifies that the preceding vowel is short. In Basque, double letters mark palatalized versions as NDD, LL, TT. Note however that RR is a trill contrasting with the single letter flap and that the palatal version of N is a plus or minus. In many European writing systems, including the English one, the doubling of the letter IK copyright or IK copyright is represented as the heterogeneous digraph ICKAY copyright instead of ICCAY copyright or IKKAY copyright respectively. In native German words, the doubling of IZ copyright, which corresponds to, is replaced by the digraph IZ copyright. Pan-dialectical digraphs equals. Some languages have a unified orthography with digraphs that represent distinct pronunciations in different dialects. For example, in Breton there is a digraph ITSE copyright that is pronounced Z in most dialects, but H in Vanité. Similarly, the Santonja dialect of French has a digraph IJ copyright that is pronounced H in words that correspond to E in Standard French. Similarly, Catalan has a digraph IXE copyright that is pronounced E florin in Eastern Catalan, but J florin or JS in Western Catalan Euro-Valencian. Discontinuous digraphs equals, the pair of letters making up a phoneme are not always adjacent. This is the case with English silent E. For example, the sequence A. E has the sound in English cake. This is the result of three historical sound changes. Cake was originally, the open syllable came to be pronounced with a long vowel, and later the final schwa dropped off, leaving. Later still, the vowel became. However, alphabets may also be designed with discontinuous digraphs. In the Tatar Cyrillic alphabet, for example, the letter N is used to write both and. Usually the difference is evident from the rest of the word, but when it is not, the sequence N. No is used for, as in NTH1/2 no cheap. The Indic alphabets are distinctive for their discontinuous vowels, such as Thai R to the first euro, A to the first euro AA. Technically, however, these are diacritics, not full letters. Whether they are digraphs is thus a matter of definition. Ambiguous letter sequences equals, some letter pairs should not be interpreted as digraphs, but appear due to compounding, like in Hogshead and cooperate. This is often not marked in any way, so must be memorized as an exception. Some authors, however, indicate it either by breaking up the digraph with a hyphen, as in Hogshead, cooperate, or with a trema mark, as in co-paragraph parate, though usage of this diaeresis has declined in English within the last century. When it occurs in names such as Clapham, Townshend and Hartshorn, it is never marked in any way. Positional alternative glyphs may help to disambiguate in certain cases, for example when round I say copyright is used as a final variant of long I copyright, the English digraph resembling would always be I hey copyright. In Romanization of Japanese, the constituent sounds are usually indicated by digraphs, but some are indicated by a single letter, and some with a trigraph. The case of ambiguity is the syllabic A, which is written as N, except before vowels or Y where it is followed by an apostrophe as now a Euro unregistered trademark. For example, the given name AAAAA is romanized as Juna Euro unregistered trademark Ikira, so that it is parsed as, rather than as. In several Slavic languages, for example Czech, double letters may appear in compound words, but they are not considered digraphs. Examples: Zuba 1/2 a euro toothless a euro unregistered trademark, Senna 1/2 a euro valuable a euro unregistered trademark, Onyoka 1/2 Euro Black Aida Euro unregistered trademark. Digraphs versus letters. In some languages, digraphs and trigraphs are counted as distinct letters in themselves, and assigned to a specific place in the alphabet, separate from that of the sequence of characters which composes them, in orthography or collation. Other languages, such as English, make no such convention, and split digraphs into their constituent letters for collation purposes. A few language alphabets that include digraphs are Bosnian, Croatian, Serbian. INJ copyright corresponds to INJAY copyright corresponds to IDAR 3/4 I copyright corresponds to. Note that in the Cyrillic orthography, these sounds are represented by single letters as well. Czech, Slovak, ICH copyright corresponds to, counted as a distinct letter, IDAR 3/4 I copyright corresponds to, not counted as a distinct letter, relatively rare digraph. Danish, Norwegian, the digraph I copyright represented until 1917 in Norway and 1948 in Denmark, but is today spelt IBETA-Y copyright. The digraph is still used in older names, but sorted as the letter with diacritic mark. Dutch, IJ copyright corresponds to. In the Netherlands it is often used as a ligature, while in Flanders it is generally described and used as two separate characters. However, regardless of where it is used, when a Dutch word starting with ish is capitalized, the entire digraph is capitalized. Hungarian, IXA copyright represents, IXA copyright represents, IGA copyright represents, ILAE copyright originally represented, but in the modern language stands for, INAE copyright represents, ICHI copyright represents, IZA copyright represents, IC copyright represents. The Hungarian alphabet additionally contains also a trigraph, IDZSAY copyright. Welsh, INGAY copyright represents, the same sound as in English, ICHE copyright represents, IFE copyright represents, IRE copyright represents, pronounced roughly like the combination HR, IFE copyright represents, IDDAY copyright represents, like the English IFE copyright and then, IFFAY copyright represents, like English IFE copyright, since Welsh IFE copyright is pronounced like an English IVE copyright, ILAE copyright represents. The digraphs listed above represent distinct phonemes. On the other hand, the digraphs IMHAY copyright, INHAY copyright, and the trigraph INE copyright, which stand for voiceless consonants, but only occur at the beginning of words as a result of the nasal mutation, are not included in the alphabet. Wymasees, Irish and Scottish Gaelic, have the uncommon digraph IO copyright. Minnan, IORA copyright represents all digraphs not considered letters, for English, see above. Dutch, INGAY copyright represents, ICHE copyright represents, ISJ copyright represents, IIA copyright represents, IOA copyright represents, IIA copyright represents. French, ICHE copyright represents, INE copyright represents, IKEY copyright represents, typically before historic front vowels. See also French phonology, German, ICHE copyright represents or, ICKAY copyright represents, IEA copyright represents followed by, IIA copyright represents followed by. Italian, ISK copyright corresponds to, before I and E, ICHE copyright corresponds to, IEA copyright corresponds to, IGLE copyright represents, palatal lateral approximant, before INE copyright represents. Polish, ICHE copyright corresponds to, ICHE copyright corresponds to, IZA copyright corresponds to, IDAR I copyright corresponds to, IDAR 1/4 I copyright corresponds to, IRIZA copyright corresponds to, IC copyright corresponds to. Portuguese, ICHE copyright corresponds to, ILHE copyright corresponds to, INHAY copyright corresponds to. Spanish, in addition to ILE copyright, there is the digraph ICHE copyright, which represents. Since 2010, neither are considered part of the alphabet. They used to be sorted as separate letters, but a reform in 1994 by the Spanish Royal Academy has allowed that they be split into their constituent letters for collation. The digraph IRRAY copyright, pronounced as a distinct alveolar trill, was never officially considered to be a letter in the Spanish alphabet, neither were IQA copyright and IKEY copyright. In non-Latin alphabets, digraphs are also found in alphabets that use scripts other than Latin. Armenian equals, in the Armenian language, the digraph OO corresponds to Greek equals, modern Greek has the following digraphs, I plus or minus I to the first represents, I micron I to the first represents, I to the first represents, I represents, I to the first represents. These are called diphthongs in Greek. In classical times most of them did represent diphthongs, and the name has stuck. I cubed represents or, I florin represents the affricate, I paragraph represents the affricate, initial I cubed I represents, initial I 1/4 I euro represents, initial I 1/2 I represents. Ancient Greek also had the diphthongs listed above, although their pronunciation in ancient times is disputed. In addition, ancient Greek also used the letter I cubed combined with a velar stop to produce the following digraphs, I cubed represents, I cubed I represents, I cubed I represents. Saconian has a few additional digraphs, I paragraph, I euro I florin I. In addition, palatal consonants are indicated with the vowel letter I to the first, but this is largely predictable. When and are not palatalized before I to the first, they are written I 1/2 and I. In Bactrian, the digraphs I squared, I cubed were used for Arabic equals, because vowels are not generally written, digraphs are rare in abjads like Arabic. For example, if sh were used for angstrom, then the sequence sh could mean either angstrom A or saha. However, digraphs are used for the aspirated and murmured consonants in languages of South Asia such as Urdu that are written in the Arabic script. This is accomplished with a special form of the letter H which is only used for aspiration digraphs, as seen with the following connecting and non-connecting consonants. Cyrillic equals. Modern Slavic languages written in the Cyrillic alphabet make little use of digraphs apart from IDTH paragraph I copyright for, IDTH I copyright for, and ID paragraph TH paragraph I copyright and IDTH paragraph I copyright for the uncommon Russian phoneme. In Russian, the sequences IDTH paragraph I copyright and IDTH I copyright do occur, but are pronounced as combinations of an implosive and a fricative. Implosives are treated as allophones of the plosive, so these sequences are not considered to be digraphs. Cyrillic only has large numbers of digraphs when used to write non-Slavic languages, especially Caucasian languages. Georgian equals. The Georgian alphabet uses a few diacritics when writing other languages. For example, in Svan, is a florin cubed a florin we, and is a florin cubed a florin we. Korean Hangul equals, as was the case in Greek, Korean has vowels descended from diphthongs that are still written with two letters. These digraphs, a and a, and in some dialects sh and ay, all end in historical a pound. Hangul was designed with a digraph series to represent the muddy consonants, a florin, bn, a, dn, a permil, dn zyn, a squared, e pound sh, a, zyn, a, elsh. Also a, with an uncertain value. These values are now obsolete, but most of these doubled letters were resurrected in the 19th century to write consonants which had not existed when Hangul was devised, a florin, a permil, a squared, a. Indic equals, most Indic scripts have compound vowel diacritics that cannot be predicted from their individual elements. This can be illustrated with Thai, where the diacritic R to the first euro, on its own pronounced, modifies the pronunciation of other vowels. In addition, the combination a pound is pronounced all. There are some words where the combinations a pound and a t pound stand for and the letter is prefixed to a consonant changes its tonic class to high, modifying the tone of the syllable. Inuit equals, Inuktitut syllabics adds two digraphs to kri, rk for q, an unregistered trademark I, a key, a cow, A florin QA, AQ, and NG for angstrom, ANG, the latter forms trigraphs and tetragraphs. Hebrew equals, in the Hebrew alphabet, and copyright may sometimes be found for. Modern Hebrew also uses digraphs made with the cubed symbol for non-native sounds, cubed, 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 and other digraphs of letters when it is written without vowels, for a consonantal letter in the middle of a word, and unregistered trademark for or, etc., that is, a consonantal letter unregistered trademark in places where it might not have been expected. Yiddish has its own tradition of transcription, so uses different digraphs for some of the same sounds, copyright, copyright, and copyrightful, also available as a single Unicode character degree, unregistered trademark or as a single character in Unicode plus or minus, unregistered trademark or squared, and squared O. The single character digraphs are called ligatures in Unicode. Unregistered trademark may also be used following a consonant to indicate palatalization in Slavic loanwords. Japanese equals, two kana may be combined into a CV syllable by subscripting the second. This convention cancels the vowel of the first. This is commonly done for CV syllables called yeon, as in a squared ahaya copyright. These are not digraphs, as they retain the normal sequential reading of the two glyphs. However, some obsolete sequences no longer retain that reading, as in aa-kwon, and a euro-mwa, now pronounced ka, ga, ma. In addition, non-sequenceable digraphs are used for foreign loans that do not follow normal Japanese assimilation patterns, such as a florin a pound t, a florin a yentu, a florin a section tye/che, a to the first a section sui, a pound we, a florin a copyright to, a pounds I. Long vowels are written by adding the kana for that vowel, in effect doubling it. However, long angstrom may be written either u or u, as in a waa tau kaiu, tokjo ta kaya. For dialects which do not distinguish a and e, the latter spelling is used for a long e, as in aaa heisei, hisi heisei. Okinawan, there are several conventions of Okinawan kana which involve subscript digraphs or ligatures. For instance, in the University of the Ryukyu system, a is, a florin squared is, but a florin squared en is. In Unicode, generally, a digraph is simply represented using two characters in Unicode. However, for various reasons, Unicode sometimes provides a separate code point for a digraph, encoded as a single character. Latin alphabet equals, the DZ and IJ digraphs in the Serbian-Croatian digraphs DA 1/2, LJ, and NJ have separate code points in Unicode. See also ligatures in Unicode. See also, list of Latin digraphs, multigraph, bigram, diacritic, diphthong, typographic ligature, list of all two-letter combinations, list of Latin letters, orthography, trigraph, tetragraph, pentagraph, hexagraph, Cyrillic digraphs. Notes and references.